Hi guys, Missing Lynx here. This video is really long, and I get that, but it's designed to cover everything that could go wrong along the way of trying to do pretty much anything in Ableton. And if you're a beginner, you're going to run into almost all of these, and each one will take you like a half hour to debug if you don't know that it could be a source of failure in the first place. So really get through this entire video. Even though it's long, it'll save you so much time and hassle and frustration. So I've been teaching these people who are brand new to Ableton, like just starting. Some of them don't have strong computer skills, some of them don't have strong music background or anything like that. And what I've learned, the biggest issue for them is it's not what you might initially think, right? So the first thing I did is I sort of took them through the interface and got them acclimated to what they actually see, so they're not overwhelmed with what they actually see. That was pretty effective. And the next thing I wanted to do is show them actually how to do stuff. And what I've since learned is that there's so many points of failure in the Ableton interface because of how complex and flexible a program it is, that all these random things that can go wrong, and even if they hypothetically know of these things, they might not know that they would be a source for failure in the signal flow and cause the track not to make any sound or something, right? There's a million little things that can go wrong. So to sort of alleviate this, I spent a lot of today creating a extensive list of little things that can go wrong along the way while you're trying to do something as basic as program a drum beat or something, right? And there's a lot of them, and check the description for a list. I'm going to try and put time markers at least in the different sections. There's a lot of points on the list, so I might not put it on every bullet point, at least not right away. But that'll help you scroll through this. This isn't going to be a short video because there's just so many different things that could go wrong, and I kind of want them all to be in one place. And so if I don't cover anything, I'll probably add another video later and put a link to that one in the description. But I think I got pretty much all the things that kind of go wrong, and these will cause complete failure. It's such as you can't hear what you're supposed to hear, or just not get the results that you're looking for, right? And that could be it's making echoes, or it's not playing the notes when you think it's supposed to play the notes, stuff like that. So the way the issues are going to arise for beginners is they're going to come across a problem like, oh, my thing's not making any sound, right? Which isn't very helpful because there's a lot of things that could cause your Ableton not to be making sound, right? And so instead of trying to troubleshoot individual problems as they occur to the user, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through the points of failure in the signal flow, right? And what you want to do when you're debugging and troubleshooting problems that are happening is you want to go through the signal flow, right, from your personal input all the way through to, by the time the sound gets out of master, going through your audio interface, out your speakers, right? It could be a failure point all along there. And you can think about if a car, say your car won't start, right? Well, is that because you don't have gasoline in it? Is it because the battery's dead? Is it because some other thing in the electrical is dead, or some belt's not working or something like that? So if you were trying to debug that and you were good enough with cars in order to do that, right, you'd look through the different steps of the mechanical flow, right, and look for failure at each of those steps. Check the fuses after you check the battery, check the alternator, etc. So that's what we're going to be doing. We're going to go through this signal flow, and I'm going to go through a bunch of different stuff that can happen along the way, and I'll talk about the kinds of problems that each of these are going to cause along the way. And so hopefully when you have these problems, you can look through the signal flow, you can check these key points of failure, and then you can correct it. Yeah, and there's a lot of them. There's a whole lot of them. There's so many of them, in fact, that it's remarkable that people learn to use Ableton at all, right? But once you get good at debugging these things rapidly, it takes 1 or 2 seconds, I'm not saying it's not going to go away. There's still times where I'm soloing some track on the other side of my project, and I'm wondering why I can't hear what's coming out of the track I'm trying to listen to. right? But very, very quickly I solve that problem because I've come across it 1,000 times. So I'm going to identify those problems, identify the quickest, best solutions, and hopefully by the end you'll feel a little bit more confident and less like every time you try and do anything in Ableton, everything goes wrong and you can't achieve anything and it's horrible, right? Because I know that feeling. Okay, so we're going to start with some things that are slightly out of the signal flow just because I want to cover some of the interface stuff that might not be working the way that you want. So let's start off. You might not be able to see the stuff you want to see, right? So say these things are gone, or some part, maybe your browser's not there and you don't know where your browser is and your help's gone and whatnot, and all this stuff is gone. You're going to find up in View, you can turn these things back on, right? Ins, outs. And there's a really easy acronym to help you remember how to deal with all this. And I learned this from Mr. Bill. I can't remember who he learned it from. But in general, if you want to toggle something, you hold down Control and Alt or Command and Alt on a Mac and you hit a letter. Now, if you remember Limbo, L-I-M-B-O, right? All right, so L is, ready? So L is this bottom thing. I is the ins and outs. M, right? B-O, which is this overview. And actually, there's also an S for the sends. I'm not really sure why that's not in Limbo. So you can think about it as Slimbo or Limbos, right? Either one will work well enough for you, but that will turn on and off everything. And if you're trying to remember like how to toggle any of those, you can just go through those letters quickly and those things will pop up or disappear, right? And that's almost everything. I mean, there's a couple other things, like there's a crossfader in here and there's a track delay, right? There are these return tracks over here, right? So that's another thing that you might want. So there is more than Limbo, but the key things for the most part are going to be Limbo. This device slot, you actually need you need to tweak your Ableton settings to even have that show up. So I'm not going to talk about that. Right? So Limbo, right? So that's the first thing. If you can't see something, you just need to enable it to be seen. You can do that up in the View menu, or you can do it with Control, Alt, and one of those letters. All right, moving on. So sometimes things will be like too big, like maybe this is going to be, let me grab a sampler really quick. So sometimes like this might be open on a sampler and this might be up. You'll notice that a lot of those things disappeared, right? Or that this might just be too high and you're like, I don't even know how to do it. You've got to drag this down manually, or you could close it here. You'll find arrows all over, and those will help you open and close things. So down here, there's an arrow here. Your groove pool, using the groove pool is a fairly advanced technique to some extent. It's a great thing to learn, but that's open and closed here, right? This is open and closed up here, right? So yeah, having things not open or not closed is going to make a big difference. Or when things are too big, right? Like this could be too big. You need to make sure that they're smaller, right? And keep in mind, these are all things that like my students have actually come across and problems they've actually, come in contact with. So if some of these things seem basic to you, just remember that people who are really starting out, there's a lot that can go wrong, even simple things, and it's not always obvious what those are. All right. So another thing, and I'm just gonna bring this up now because it's kind of affects different things, but there's this button up here which causes your playhead to be tracked, right? So this is called a playhead, and if this isn't on, it's not going to follow anymore. Or if you make some change, it's going to stop following. And in Ableton 10, it's a little bit more well behaved because it still will follow the next time, right? If in Ableton 9 and below, if you do something, that will turn off permanently, right? So you might want this on or you might want it off, but if you don't know that it's there in the first place and that it will change its behavior just from clicking on something, then that can get really frustrating because if it's following and you're trying to edit some MIDI notes or whatever and it keeps jumping away from where you're trying to work, all right, that will be really frustrating. And this also happens in clips, right? So if you were down here and you had some long clip and you were playing this clip, right, this will also follow here if you have this enabled. And if you don't, the playhead will run away from you and you won't see what's being played moment by moment. So more on the interface problems that can go wrong. The metronome, so either people will have the metronome on or they'll have it off and they wish it was on and they can't get their timing right. If you're recording, because of how digitally precise computers are, you might think you're playing in time, but you're not playing in time. Right, you're going to be a little bit fast, a little bit slow. You're going to wander a little bit, and so this really helps you stay on time and get all of your MIDI notes and whatnot to happen when they're supposed to happen. So you can toggle this on and off right here, and when it's yellow, it's on, right? And if, depending on how you have it set, it's always going to be on whether you want it on or not. This button right here will make it so it's only clicking if you're recording, right? And so if I just hit play, it's not going to click, but if I were to click this, right now the metronome's going. So that's a really nice option, but if you're wondering why your metronome keeps turning on and off automatically, you might have this selected, right? So be aware of this option. Be aware of this count-in, right? Because this count-in will cause you not to record right away. Right, so we've got 2 bars of counting before we're recording, and if you aren't aware of that, then you're going to be like, wait, why isn't it recording right away? And if you're not aware that there's multiple settings that this can be at, then you might be, well, it always started after 1 bar, it always started immediately, why is it taking 2 bars or 4 bars? These things can get changed, right? So the next thing is this quantization. This is the global quantization, and this is going to affect all playing of these clips unless the clip is specifically set to quantize some other way. And what that means is, if we're playing along, all right, let me turn that off. But if we're playing along, right, and you can see that this is iterating and we're going forward in time, and I want to record, if this is like set on like 8 bars or something, it's going to look for every 8 bars in order to start. And so that would be on 37, right? So the bar 1, right, plus what? Oh, sorry, it'd be on 33 would be that 8 bars. But you can see it's just going to sit here and sit here and sit here. And I'm like, why isn't it recording? Why isn't it recording? Why isn't it recording? Why isn't it recording? Right? And it just keeps sitting there. And then all of a sudden, like 8 bars later or whatever, then it finally starts recording. Right, and you'll see that it finally starts recording. That's because this was set to 8 bars. Now you also notice these shortcuts up here, Control 9, Control 0, etc. You might change this by accident, just by accidentally, maybe you're trying to hit Control I and you accidentally hit the 8 key, and now you're on quarter note quantization and you can't get the clip to start on the bar because it's starting on the beat, like the quarter note beat. Right, so that's the kind of issues that show up there. Right, and another equally bad issue is if you have it on none, then you're just going to be in the middle of a beat, right? You're going to be wildly off time, right? And so this one is not going to correspond to a downbeat, and all of your MIDI notes are not really going to happen when you want them to happen, right? Because the whole clip's not happening when you want it to, right? So that's the peril of being on none. The most user-friendly is probably 1 bar or 2 bars in terms of recording stuff in, but you just need to be aware that this global quantize, whether you want it or not, is going to be affecting basically all the clips in your project. Record buttons, right? And I might touch on this a little bit when I go through the clips and the tracks and stuff as well, but there's actually three in some ways, depending on what you want to count, more than 3 record buttons, but there's 3 record buttons. Or 4 record buttons really that you need to be aware of. Right, so there's this record button down here. This is the track record button, and that's going to cause these clip record buttons to pop up. Right, without that you can't record into a clip. So if you're wondering why you can't record into this clip and it's just not working, it's because you don't have this on. right? But then to get it to record a clip, you need to hit the clip record button, right? And then when you're playing in notes, it'll start recording. Now, the most prominent record button is this one, but this is actually the arrangement record button. You can see in the lower left-hand corner right now, it says arrangement record button. That's actually going to record to the arrangement view side, right, and start recording there. So that's not going to do what you want it to if you're trying to record a clip and you're like, okay, I'm hitting record, I'm hitting play, why isn't it recording the clip? I can't make it do anything. Well, that's because you didn't hit this button, right? But what the arrangement record button is doing is it's causing whatever's playing on this front side to show up on this back side. So notice how this has, you know, MIDI clips on it now where it didn't have them before. So you don't want to hit this button unless you're really sure about it, because your song goes here ultimately. Like, you're going to want to lay out over time what happens sonically, and that all happens on the arrangement side. So if this record button is pressed, you're going to be overwriting everything that you've put there and like destroying your project. So you want to be very careful never to hit this button unless you're really sure that you want to record onto the back side. Right. There's also this, which is the session record button, right? And if you look down the lower left, it's toggling. I'm going to read it and then I'm going to explain what it says. But it says it toggles between playback and overdub recordings for clips which are currently playing on armed tracks, right? So an armed track means that this is red, right? This is the armed session recording, as you can see in the lower left, right? And so if it's an armed track, this is going to, instead of play, it's going to let you record over or add MIDI notes to, right? So to give an example, you know, here I'm playing notes and they're showing up. If I try and do the same thing and this isn't on, right, which it's not on right now, even though this red record button is on, the MIDI notes aren't going to show up, right? And you're going to have the same problem with automating parameters, right? If you're like twisting knobs that are connected to parameters that you're trying to control, right? That's also not going to record, right? So those are your 4 record buttons. There's the arrangement record, there's the session record, there's the track arm, which is also a record button, then there's the actual clip record button, right? You just got to get them straight, and it might take practice. But if you're trying to make a clip or whatever and it's not showing up or whatever, maybe you're hitting the record button up here. And remember, this is dangerous. This one up here is dangerous because it's going to write stuff to this side, right, which you might not want to do. Next, just while we're on this session record button, over here there's a couple of things, which is record punch in, punch out. Right, the punch and switch. What that means is, say we are looped in our arrangement view, right? So Control L will cause it to loop here, and we're playing, right? If I'm trying to record just in this loop, I might want a little bit of a lead up before I do that, right? So you'll notice when I play this, if I hit this button and play this, if I don't have this on and I hit play, it's going to start recording immediately, right? You can see this MIDI clip just got recorded in. However, if we do have this on and I hit record and I hit play, you'll notice nothing's coming up. Nothing's coming up. But once I hit this loop brace, it starts recording. So that's the functionality of this punch and switch, and it's useful, but if it's toggled and you don't know that it's toggled or what it does, and you're wondering why it's not recording where you tell it to record, and your loop brace is way off to the side or something, and you didn't even realize that that was there, it's going to cause headaches for you. All right, let's do the browser really quick. So you're going to mess up here too. Sometimes like you might have like a letter up here, right? It might like be like an accent that you didn't even mean to put in there for some reason. Like you're like looking in the main part of the screen and the focus happened to be there, and you're like tapping on keys, maybe trying to play MIDI notes with this guy up here. and nothing's happening, and you're actually just like adding stuff here, and then you go to browse your user library and like, where the hell did my user library go? Like, where are all my clips? Where are all my samples? There's nothing here. It might just be that you have something up here, right? And this is how you want your search feature to work. Like if you're looking for something that's at 120 beats per minute, you can type in a 120. It's only going to show stuff with 120 in it, right? But if you have, it's going to reduce what you see, and if your user library is missing stuff, right? Like let's just say you have an H, and a lot of things have an H in it, but you're going to be missing random things because it's only going to be showing stuff that has an H in it, right? And so if you can't find stuff, right, it might be that you have something up here. Yeah, the other thing is it's really, really easy, and I still do this all the time, where I'm clicking on something up here, and I mean to look in here, and I'm like, oh man, I need a sample, and what I mean to do is browse through my sample library, and I click on samples, and I'm just like, what is this, right? I'll see this and I'll know, oh wait, I'm supposed to go to my user library, right? Same thing, I'll think about like, oh, I want to compress something, or I want to add reverb, and what I really want to do is grab like a special one, but I go to audio effects and I'm looking at this reverb, or I just want to grab a basic whatever, and I'm not looking at my plugins when I want to, or I'm looking at my plugins when I should have been looking at audio effects. So that's really common. Also, you can find your factory packs down here, right? So if you're like looking for all your factory packs and whatnot, they're here. And if you're looking in your user library and can't find, your stuff that's in your core library, or vice versa, that could be a problem. Yeah, so that's another pretty common thing that happens, even to me still. But like these problems are going to still come up. It's just they take you half a second or 2 seconds to solve, as opposed to having to go look at YouTube videos like this one and spend an hour debugging stuff and realizing that you just need to click one fucking button, right? So yeah, that's another issue that will come up. So that's all the display and browser things that I wanted to go over. There might be some other ones, but those are definitely the main ones. So let's go to your hardware and your human interface devices. So we'll start with your MIDI interface, right? So if you're taking a MIDI controller, a lot of MIDI controllers run off of USB, and so you might just be plugging it into your USB drive or a USB port on your computer. That's one thing, but a lot of times you'll plug it into a USB interface or an audio interface that has, MIDI interface, right? It might be like a USB plug for your computer, and then on the other end of it is a little box with some MIDI ports, right? Those are the circular ones with the 5 pins in them, right? And you might be plugging into that, right? So one, that might not be attached, right? This has definitely happened. It just might not be attached, or there might be loose cables or whatever. But the other thing is in your preferences, and you can get that by doing options preferences, or you'll notice it's control or command comma will bring up your preferences. And in order to get your MIDI to work right, this could be keyboards, this could be the interface itself. You need to go to this MIDI tab, and you need to make sure that they're working right here, right? So this, if I want to plug in like a keyboard into my audio interface, I need to make sure that this is up, right? So you can see Complete Audio 6 MIDI, right? So when I plug a MIDI device into my audio interface, which is this Complete Audio 6, it will work as long as I have that available. This down here also will control whether or not that works, right? But this is slightly different, right? So if you're just trying to play MIDI notes, it will work as long as this is going. But if you're trying to control parameters or otherwise control live, you need to have these guys highlighted, right? So you see there's an input and an output. So Complete Audio 6 MIDI, right? Basically you want the 4 corners on. If this thing's supposed to follow your MIDI clock, like if it's like a drum machine with a sequencer on it or something, then you're going to want these on as well. And that will mean that this device can control Ableton's MIDI, and Ableton control this thing's MIDI. Or sorry, it's MIDI clock, right? Which is like what's the tempo, when is the beat hitting, right? It can get them in sync. So if it's not going to get in sync unless you have this sync button pressed. The other thing that can happen is oftentimes if you like plug in a USB keyboard or something, like a piano type keyboard or a drum pad or whatever into Ableton while Ableton is already running, sometimes Ableton just isn't going to work with it, and you need to have it plugged in before you ever start Ableton. That's not true of all controllers all the time, but it definitely is true of a lot of controllers a lot of the time. So if your controller's not working and you plugged it in after Ableton started, go ahead and quit out of Ableton, plug it in, or even re-plug it in maybe, but start Ableton again after you've plugged in your hardware. It could be that your hardware is actually broken. That's also possible, like you have a keyboard and it actually doesn't work, or just the USB out on it doesn't work or something like that. This is like your last resort. If you've checked everything else and you just cannot get it to work, that's possible. It could also be the drivers on your computer if it requires special drivers. Like if you have some Casio keyboard and it works off USB but it needs special Casio drivers. So definitely make sure you have the manufacturer drivers installed on your computer. Otherwise your hardware might not work. But it could be that your device is actually broken. You're basically trying to rule everything else out first. The only other human interface I want to talk about is there's an ability to play MIDI notes with your computer keyboard, right? Like your, alphabet keyboard, right? A, B, C, D, F, G type keyboard. And that's this button up here. And you can also hit the M button. And I think that might just be Ableton 10 that they added that. But you can hit the M button and that will toggle this. But as long as that's on, when you hit the letters A through L and also W, E, T, Y, and U, right? Those corresponds to keys, right? So A is a C, right? W is going to be the next half step up, S is the next half step up, E is the next half step up, and it actually maps out how a keyboard is, right? So you notice that the W, E, T, Y, and U, those are the black keys, and A, S, D, F, G, H, J, K, L, those are all the white keys on a piano, right? So if you have that on, when you press those notes, it's going to think that you're trying to play MIDI. Now, the reason that's a problem is it's not going to think that you're doing another thing with those keys. So check it. A nice feature is if you press S, it will close everything on the arrangement view, and it'll actually also close, like if you have groups and stuff, right? And say you have like a bunch of things and you just got tons of groups open. If you hit S on your arrangement view side, it'll close everything and make it tidy. It'll also close everything and make it tidy on the session view side, which is this side. But if this shit's open and you also have your MIDI keyboard enabled, when you hit S, it's going to think that you're playing the note D, and it's not going to work. And you can see this yellow right here, that's pumping. That means it's receiving a MIDI note from my computer keyboard. And instead of when I hit S closing this, right, it's sending the note D. So if certain keys that are on your home row, or also W, E, T, Y, or U aren't working the way you think they should, it might be that you have your MIDI keyboard enabled, or if you're used to being able to type those notes and actually play instruments on a MIDI track or something, it might be that that MIDI keyboard is not enabled, right? So if either of those behaviors are coming up, it's because this isn't toggled the way that you want it. Right, remember, you can do that with M as well. All right, so that's all the human interface stuff that I'm going to go through right now. There are some other ones, like if you're recording through microphones. I'm going to do one thing on recording through microphones right now, but there's other problems, like maybe your mic preamp is turned down, or if you've got a condenser mic, you need phantom power for a condenser mic to sound like it should, right? But if your preamp's down, right, you might not be getting any signal out of your mic, right? And that's also true for if you're trying to play, like say you've got like an electric violin, right? And you've got a cable going from your electric violin into your complete audio or your audio interface. You won't get any signal even though you are playing, right? You need to jack up your preamp, which is one of the knobs next to the input on your audio interface, right? Yeah, so that's kind of the problems that could happen. Some mics have an on-off switch, and if you don't know that and you're not turning on your mic, it might not work also. but mic recording, there might be other issues too. Yeah, and the might be broken or whatever. But yeah, let's move on from the human interface and start getting deeper into the signal flow. All right, so I keep talking about this signal flow. That's most of what Ableton is, right? Things are going from point to the next point to the next point, through devices, through the track, right, through the groups, all the way to the master, and it's eventually all flowing into the master. And then once it gets to the master, it goes out to your audio interface, and then your audio interface will send it out to the speakers that are connected into them, right? So when I'm talking about signal flow, I'm talking about the whole path from you to the speakers, right, and all the places that can go wrong. So next would be at the track inputs. So you might have your devices working fine, but if this, for instance, right here is set to no input, even if this is turned on, like my keyboard's turned on and I'm playing, it might feel like, hey, why am I not able to get any MIDI, right? Why is it not showing up? Well, the reason is because you told it not to take MIDI from anything, right? So if you had it on computer keyboard, right, you could take it just from your computer keyboard if you wanted. I'm not going to worry about this, but if this is not set to all channels and you're like broadcasting over channel 1, right, then that also wouldn't work. Right. Just make sure this is set to all channels until you know why you would want to set it to not all channels. That's more of an advanced topic. But generally you want to keep this on all ins for MIDI tracks, right? And so as long as that's on all ins, you can see these yellow things pumping here, and that means the yellow thing should also be pumping here. Now if you have an instrument on this MIDI track, those yellow things are going to disappear, and it's going to be replaced by a mixer bar. So I don't have a speaker out right now, but I'll turn it on once this matters. So that's going to be replaced. So definitely check up here to see if those yellow dots are hitting, to see if it's coming, if the problem is actually at your hardware, right? Because if the problem's at the hardware, these yellow dots will never show up. However, if your hardware is fine and this isn't set right, then it'll break down at this like link in the chain, right? So the other one I'm going to go through really quick is, instead of on a MIDI track, the in and outs from an audio track, the default for new audio tracks is for audio to come from external in. Now this is actually kind of dangerous because if you're playing out of speakers and you have a microphone attached, even your laptop speakers and your laptop microphone, so you might just be on your laptop, but because your laptop has a microphone, because your laptop has speakers and you're listening on speakers, you might get what's called a feedback loop. So your mic is going to pick up what's coming out of your speakers, and then it's going to go through Ableton, and then it's going to come out of your speakers again and go back into your mic over and over again. And that sounds approximately like this. So I'm going to throw a limiter on here to make sure that this doesn't explode too hard. Limiters prevent the volume from getting too high, right? So if I want it to only peak at minus like 7 decibels or something, which shouldn't be too bad, it'll stop it from like exploding on us basically. But if I hit this record button, because I do it by accident or whatever reason, this is going to start listening on that microphone, right? And you can see this green pumping, that's me talking, right? That's going to start playing as soon as I hit this, right? And for some reason my limiter didn't engage beyond or where it was supposed to. Should have done this at -7, but then probably could have been because we're recording. All right, so it's going to get out of control pretty quickly. I'm going to show you one more time, right, with the volume down. All right, so check. Right, so that can be a really bad problem if you don't know why that's happening. So just I usually have it so it defaults where this is off on audio tracks. Right, the audio tracks are coming from no input. But keep in mind, if you do that, you can set that as your default. If you right-click on an audio track, you can set its structure as the default audio track. Right, and now when I add a new audio track, it's going to start with no input. Just keep in mind, if that's how you've set it up and you're trying to record on a microphone, then you're kind of screwed because, well, you're not screwed, but you need to remember to turn it back on to external in, right? So if you do want the speakers to be playing, right, you want to make sure that your microphone is not going to play. So either drag the volume on your track all the way down, or you can even turn this off. And so when you're recording, make sure that we're recording from here, and I start recording, you'll notice that this is capturing everything just fine, right? But it's not getting played out the speakers because this is off, right? I turn this on, and that's interesting that it's not playing, but whatever. Oh, because I have the volume all the way down here, right? Cool, right? And you can see how big and loud that is. You don't want that to happen, obviously. Okay, so we've talked about these track ins. The other place that it can go wrong is these, right? So auto is the default, and it's generally going to be the most useful for you. But the way it works is if you have this record button on, it's going to record, and if you don't have the record button on, it's going to play, right? So to give an example, it's actually easier to see in Midi, but let's just say I've got some Midi notes down here, right? If I hit play, as long as I'm on auto, it's actually going to play. Right now, if I'm on in, it's not going to play, and you notice that these are not showing up, right? But if I have my session record on, which we talked about earlier, I can play extra notes, right? Now that's also true if you're on auto and it's playing. Now it is pumping out this MIDI. You can see the yellow dots pumping here. This clip is sending MIDI to the track, and I can play extra notes as long as this session record button at the top is on. So I can add notes to it. Or if it's receiving MIDI from another track, like if a track over here was routing MIDI to this track, as long as this record button is going, it will pay attention, right? So if I play this, what you'll notice happen is this is going to get sent to there, and as long as this session record button is going, those notes that I put in over here are getting sent over to this MIDI track, and it's going to receive them, right? It would also do that if I had this on or on in, but as soon as I turn off this record button, it's not going to do that. Now, for audio tracks, if you want it to constantly listen, regardless of whether you have this on, right? You'll check this. You can see, I don't want to turn this on because it's going to cause that feedback loop, but you can see this pumping down here. If I turn it to auto on an audio track, it's not going to listen to my microphone unless I hit record. And if I hit record, you can see the faders are pumping again, right? So that's the behavior of auto. Ins only are always going to listen regardless of if you're recording or not, right? And that might be really useful. But auto, it's only going to record if you hit the record button. All right, so that's how this works up here, and if you've changed anything and it's not recording like you want to, either on MIDI tracks or on audio tracks, then check there, right, along the way, right, especially if like this is working here, if you see the yellow pumping here but not down here, right, remember if this is on auto, you can see the yellow pumping here but not down here. I need this on for it to work. Also off, right, off, I never use off, honestly. Like you can see it's sort of working, but it's not yellow, it's grayed out. So it's like acting like, oh, it should be capturing, but it's not really going to capture, right? So you can see here, for instance, if we erase this, it's not receiving this, even though MIDI is coming from this track and trying to send over here. Right, if we go to auto, it'll go back to, oh, no, we need the session record going, but I'm not going to do that right now. But right, when I draw MIDI notes, or play MIDI notes, rather, right, they're not recording, right? They're hypothetically reaching the track, but because I'm on off, it's not going to record. If I do this the first time, yeah, it's still not going to record. Right, so auto's generally what you want it at, and just be very conscious of this record button. All right, so I'm going to... Okay, so the next one I want to show you is it's less likely to happen unless you have a VST down here. And the reason is for MIDI VSTs, MIDI will come in from the left and it'll go into Cthulhu or whatever. So say Cthulhu has, right, if you don't know anything about Cthulhu, don't worry about that. That's not the point of this. But what this does is it takes a note and it makes more notes out of it, right? So if I'm trying to get MIDI over to this track from Cthulhu, because this is where my instrument is, right? And I have a video on how to set up Cthulhu, which will sort of go through similar stuff to this, but it's going to focus less on the breakdown. But if I'm trying to get MIDI from Cthulhu, the way you would do that is say under this MIDI from, you're like, oh man, I sure need to get that from Cthulhu. And you'll try and get it, right? And this will be pumping, right? And you won't get what you want. And what we want to get is, you can hear it's all these notes, right? Now watch what happens when I hit record here. I'm just getting this one note. Well, what's happening is this is going post effects, and what that means is it's looking everything up until the actual device that it gets to, the instrument it gets to, right? So if we had like a chord device and we had a pitch device, right, it's going to look at what the MIDI looks like after these MIDI effects before it gets to this VST. Right? And VSTs are, even though it's a MIDI VST, it's treated slightly differently. And so when it says post effects, it means after the MIDI chain, which happens before the instrument chain, which starts here with your first instrument. And all VSTs are instruments. You know, those that aren't effects. So what I need to do is I actually need to pull this directly from Cthulhu. Right? So this is Cthulhu, the track. This first one is the track. This second one is the device in the track, right? And if you don't have that set, you're not going to get what you want. And that will happen in other MIDI VSTs as well. That also will happen if you're trying to send MIDI to something, like because it needs it for a side chain or something like that. So if you're learning about side chain compression, people are like, oh, use LFO tool or use volume shaper and send MIDI to it. If you just send MIDI to the track, right? If I just you know, down here saying MIDI 2, well, let's send it to Cthulhu, it's going to send it here. And if it's a sidechain, it needs a specific sidechain input, it's not going to get to the right place. And I would need to actually go here and pick the Cthulhu sidechain, right? And you'll notice there's 3 inputs on Cthulhu. It probably has something to do with that. I never send MIDI to Cthulhu. It's better to pull MIDI from it. But this is really a general point about trying to get MIDI from or sending MIDI to devices. You got to make sure that you select the device and not just the track that's on the device. And remember, if you drop a device on it, this automatically got named Cthulhu, so it's really confusing, right? Now, if this was named track holding Cthulhu, right, that would make more sense. This is the track holding Cthulhu, and this is actually Cthulhu. Right, so this will show up with other VSTs. This is just a general point, but this is another point of failure. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay, now let's get into the clips themselves. Right, so there's 2 types of clips. There's audio clips and there's MIDI clips, and a lot of the confusion comes from confusing the audio and the MIDI. Right, MIDI is just note data, and it doesn't actually produce a sound on its own. It needs to be sent to an instrument, and an instrument's job is to translate MIDI into audio sound, right? And so a MIDI track, right, that's this whole vertical column, a MIDI track, in order to produce sound, needs to be receiving MIDI or transmitting MIDI into an instrument, right? So let's put an instrument on here really quick. I'm just going to do operator because it's reliable and stuff. Right, and so what we will find is, as long as I'm recording, and note, I need to, under this MIDI from, make sure that I am recording, right? Because I tried it, didn't work, and I'm like, oh, why isn't my keyboard working? Oh, it's because this was on no input, right? So this is the type of thing you're trying to debug. Right, so as long as it's getting MIDI, whether it's getting MIDI that way, right, or it's getting it from a clip that contains MIDI, right, it'll start producing a sound. An audio clip will just produce sound as long as it's got a sample in it, right? You know, 'cause you know. Right? So that'll work. Now, if it's not working though, there's a handful of things that could be causing that to happen. So one, the clip might be disabled. Now the way to enable and disable clips as well as MIDI notes, right, is to hit the 0 key. You can also right click and you can tell it to disable, deactivate notes, right? But the 0 key is the fastest way to do it, but it's also the one that's most likely to happen by accident. So for instance, on my computer, the up, down, left, right arrows are right next to the 0 key, and sometimes when I'm hitting right, you know, I'm trying to go right, like shift these MIDI notes to the right, I actually hit 0 and I turn the MIDI notes off. Now you'll see they go transparent, so that's your clue to see if it's off. So if you see a MIDI clip and it's a gray color, then it's probably off. Now it could just be colored gray, right? So if I turn this back on, there's not a whole lot of difference between these, right? So it could be that it's actually on, but that it's gray, right? These turn transparent, but this doesn't really translate because you know it's got this gray background and everything. So one, don't color your clips gray. You can color other things gray. Don't color your clips gray because it'll make your MIDI notes gray and you won't know whether they're on or off, right? Don't do it. You have all these other colors to choose from, but 0 will enable or disable them. Sometimes you want them disabled, sometimes you want them enabled. If the play button's gone, it's disabled, right? If all it's got is a stop button, it's disabled, right? So that's how you'll know. But that's one problem that it could be. The notes in the MIDI clip could be disabled. It could be that you're looking at the wrong track or you're looking at the wrong clip, right? And that can cause a whole bunch of problems. Like, so say you're looking at this and you're playing this and you don't realize you're looking at this because it's subtle that this is highlighted and you're wondering, you know, why those notes aren't playing, and you're playing something that has no notes in it. Or similarly, let's just say you're trying to make edits and you're like, no, I want this note over here and I want this note over here. Now it's right, and you're like, okay, go to play. Why aren't you playing? Like, why aren't the changes changing? Right? It's because it's playing this clip. And if you duplicate these clips, right, then this will add to the problem because these look identical, but it's the bottom one that's playing. So if I'm making changes and I'm like trying to make a change, I'm like, why isn't this first note changing? It's because I'm actually playing this clip and it would be this note that I need to change, right? So that's another thing to be aware of. And the hint is, if you see this playhead moving, this black line moving, then you're looking at the right clip, right? But you might not be. You might not even be looking at the right track, right? You might be looking at some clip that's over here and trying to edit this clip while this one's playing or something like that. You might be on the whole wrong track, not just on the whole wrong clip. The next one is about media files that are being referenced might not be at the right place at all. Right, so to give you a quick little example, I'm going to just drag this here, right? So this is a clip. If I drag it in, it will play, and the reason it will play is because it's referencing this file, and it knows where this file is, right? It knows where this is. However, if I were to pull this somewhere else, right? Let's put it in the class folder as well. Right, so if that gets moved or it gets deleted, or you're like renaming folders in your user library or something, then any instrument that's using that or any audio clip that's referencing that, when you do or when you load it, it's not going to load. It's going to say sample offline, but if you're not looking, you might not see sample offline. Why isn't this audio clip playing? Why isn't this audio clip playing? And the reason it's not playing is because it doesn't know where the file is that it's supposed to be playing. Right? And this will also happen with sampler devices, which is an instrument that plays samples. So if a sample is missing, it's missing. The hint is if this bar turns red, read this, it says media files are missing. Right? So if I were to click this, right, I would see, oh, it doesn't know where this is, and hopefully I could find it. And it searched my library, it found it, it replaced it, and now it's going to work. Right? But if things are deleted, right, it's not going to find it. Or if you're searching in places that aren't in the list that was over there, which is usually just your user library, right, and the core library. So if you just move it onto your desktop or something, it's not going to know to look at your desktop. So another issue that comes up with clips is you might not be able to drop a clip where you want. And the reason for that is dropping MIDI clips on audio tracks or audio tracks on MIDI clips will not work the way you want it to. And so you'll notice this won't come on this audio track at all. So if I was grabbing a MIDI clip from somewhere else and I'm trying to like drop some chord or something on here, like why can't I do this? Like why can't I do it? It's because this isn't a MIDI track. It doesn't accept MIDI. Right, you can drop them in blank spaces, you can drop them on MIDI tracks. Yeah, so that will never work. You'll never be able to drop a MIDI track clip on an audio track. Right? If you try and drop an audio clip on a MIDI track, right, like a sample of any variety on a MIDI track, watch what happens. It drops, but what actually happened is it turned into a MIDI or an audio track automatically. Right? See this? It's an audio track. Now, it was a MIDI track. Right? I'll undo. See, it's a MIDI, and now it turns into an audio track. So you can drop audio onto MIDI tracks, but it's going to convert it. Or if there's already stuff it's on here, it's not on a MIDI track, it's not going to convert the whole MIDI track. A different dialogue is going to pop up. And you're going to be like, whoa, what's this? This is a feature that Ableton has where it will analyze a sample and they'll try and figure out what notes are going on in that sample, or if it's drums, like it'll try and build a drum pattern for you out of the drum hits that happen on that, right? And those drum hits will be, I believe they're general MIDI compatible. So I have a video on being general MIDI compatible. I have one in, actually I don't know if I've made that one yet. I think I talked about it in my MIDI filters video, but if not, I'm going to do a whole video just on general MIDI and how to use general MIDI effectively. But right, so if I do this and like I do harmony, it's going to analyze this and then it's going to convert it to a bunch of MIDI notes. So I'm not even going to get that audio clip that I thought I was going to get, right? It's not going to sound like this.
The secrets I keep.
Right, it's going to be some approximation of the notes that girl was singing or something, right? And it's not always right. It's not foolproof, right? So if that shows up, then you know what you're doing is you're dropping an audio clip onto a MIDI track, right? That's really useful, right? If you want to like extract the notes and like say you have like a guitar part and you want to put that on an organ or something, you could take that guitar sample that's just audio, drop it onto a MIDI track, and you could drop that audio track onto a MIDI track and convert it into the notes, and then you could play it on an organ or whatever you want. So it's really useful, but it will cause confusion. So make sure you know what your MIDI tracks are or your audio tracks are. It will say MIDI here and it'll say audio there. Right? That's your biggest hint. But there's some other things that should tip you off. But yeah, don't get your audio and your MIDI confused. That's a big beginner problem. If you can just make that one distinction clearly, right, and like in a applied practical sense, like be really familiar with the difference between audio and MIDI, that's going to solve so many headaches, I promise. So you might have problems editing your MIDI clips. Like say you're trying to go into your MIDI clips and you're trying to edit them, right? Let's just say, you know, you have these notes or something like that, right? Well, a few things could go wrong here, right? Here I'm double clicking everything, but I know to double click because I'm not in draw mode. Now if you're in draw mode, your cursor will actually be this pencil and you'll just be able to click once. You can drag, right? If you're trying to control automations, you'll be able to draw in automations, right? If you're in the other mode, which you can toggle between by hitting the letter B, right? You can hit B to toggle between these two. There's also this yellow button at the top, right, that will change by clicking on it or by hitting B. Right, that's how you toggle between these things, but they have different functionality. So this one, if I double click up here, it's going to create a point and it's going to connect the dots. If I click up here in draw mode, it's going to look at the grid that I'm on and it's going to, you know, create a spot in the grid. If I tighten the grid, I did this by hitting Control 1 to tighten the grid, make the grid looser. Is Control 2. You can go to triplet grid by Control 3. But it will draw whatever resolution you have your grid set to. Right? So, but if you're not aware of the distinction of being in draw mode or not, then it's not going to behave consistently, right? And you're going to run into problems. The other thing is you might have these red things and you want to access the notes and you're like, all I can do is change these red lines. I don't even know what these red lines are or whatever. That's because you're looking at the automation lanes, and that is toggled by this right down here. So to control MIDI notes, you need to have that off. To control automation, you need to have that on, right? And if you want to like stretch out your MIDI notes, you need to not be in draw mode. If you want to draw MIDI notes quickly or draw in velocities quickly, right, you need to be in draw mode. Otherwise, you're going to be selecting them, right? But you can also highlight multiple notes if you're not in draw mode, right? So there's benefits to both modes. Toggle back and forth between them with B. Pretty straightforward. All right, so another problem might be you might be in your MIDI clip and you're like, wait, where are all my notes? I can't see them, I can't find them. And it's not completely clear that they're there. If you see these red lines, there's notes somewhere. And what that means is there's somewhere up or somewhere down. Right, now I'm using my mouse wheel to scroll, but the other way you can do it is you can grab the left-hand side and pull up or down, and notice I was just above the notes, or you might be able to be below the notes. There is 10 octaves from C-2 all the way up here. The other thing, you might be zoomed way out and you'll be like, I can't do anything here, like, you know, this isn't a whole octave, like you can't get anything where you want, right? So you might be too far zoomed out, or you might be like so zoomed in, especially this way, like horizontally zoomed in, that you're like, where are my notes? I can't find my notes, right? One trick is you can double click and it will resize to whatever you're selected at. So if we have this selected, it's going to zoom in there. If we're not selecting anything, it'll review to the whole clip. Here, I can double click and it will focus on the bulk of my notes. Cool, so that's really easy. The other thing you can do is if you hit Control and Alt, notice my mouse cursor turns into this little hand. Now I can just grab and I can move this, right? I can move it left to right, up and down. So that's useful too. I don't use that all the time. Mostly I'm double clicking. Notice I selected a specific note, and when I double clicked, it zoomed me into that note, right? So if you get zoomed into a note and you're like, why isn't this double click trick working? Right, it's because you want to be selecting on nothing to get kind of like the optimal view. You can zoom in and out by holding down the mouse cursor and going left and right here, or up and down up here. So that should help. But yeah, the MIDI notes might be there, they just might be off screen, right? And there's not like a scroll bar to make it obvious that you can scroll around. The other thing that might be happening is if this note fold button is going on, you're only going to see some notes. And like if you're trying to get to any other notes besides ones that already have MIDI notes on them, you're not even going to see them, right? Fold will only show you the MIDI notes that have notes on them already. Right, so now when I hit fold, now this C3 will pop up, but if I don't have a C3 and it's on fold, I can't find it. And if you don't know that it's on fold, maybe it's on fold by default for some reason, or maybe you click that by accident or whatever, and you can't see all the notes, that's going to cause problems as well. So just be aware of that fold and how to toggle on and off to be able to see all the notes and get at all the notes. But it also helps you see just the notes that you have and not all this extra space, right? You can't get lost as easily if fold is on, right? especially vertically. Horizontally, you can still get lost. Like I could still get lost like way in here, and if I don't know that I'm zoomed in really far horizontally, I won't know to zoom out, right? And you can see sort of a proxy of how far zoomed in you are here. Like down here, let's say you're like around like a 1/64th grid or something like that. So another issue that comes up a lot is you will touch these notes and you're like, why isn't it playing? Why isn't it playing? You know, and it'll play when you hit play, but it's not playing when you touch the note. Well, you can get it to play when this is on, right? And even if you know about this, you might forget about it a lot, right? Especially when you're first beginning. It might be like, wait, why aren't these playing? Why aren't these playing? I'm telling you right now, it's because you want this on. You don't usually want this on unless you're like performing or something, or you're like just trying to hear everything else, not have random notes playing as you're clicking around. You might want that off, but usually you want that on. Just like usually you want this one on over here in your browser.
The secrets
so
I
if you can't hear the samples that you're browsing through, right, that's the same problem. You don't have this toggled. Right. And there's a lot of these things. You'll find these headphones, these little blue headphone icons elsewhere. Get used to them and their functionality, but this will happen a lot. You know, usually you want to know when you click in, okay, it's that note. Okay, I want that one. I'm gonna put in this one, put in this one. If you can't hear it, it's like, how do you know what notes to use? Right. Now as I move it around, it's not playing. Right. So definitely be very aware of whether this is on or off. Otherwise, it's going to drive you crazy. So that's it for the clip stuff. Let's move on to the instruments, right? And things that could be happening at the instrument level. First one is your instrument might not be on. So everything has a power button, and if that power button's off, it's just not going to make sound. And so you're like, hey, why isn't this operator working? Well, it's not working because the operator's off. And you might have done that by accident, right? Or if you like open some person's project or something, you know, whatever. There could be a million reasons why it's not on, right? Make sure that your instrument's on. And so I want to sort of draw your attention. We've got this yellow dots down here. That's the MIDI coming into the track. And whether it's coming from your keyboard or whether it's coming from a clip, that's the MIDI coming in. So if the MIDI's not coming in, then back up a step in the signal flow and check what's going on with the clip or your computer hardware. But as long as it's coming into here, this instrument should be making noise. Now there's reasons why instruments might not be making noise, right? For instance, the volume on this instrument might be down for some reason. And so now we've got this happening, we've got MIDI coming, but there's no output. Right, and you can see the output from the instrument right here. And then from here, it's going to flow right into the effects chain, which is off to the right here. And then eventually flow into your track. So you also see the green here, but right now I want you to focus on, is my instrument working? It's working as long as there's a green bar down here. Right? And like, notice this green bar disappears, right? Another reason this might happen is a lot of like presets and patches that you load will have a long attack time. An attack is how long it takes the note to come in to full volume. And so if you have a really long attack time, like if I go to this oscillator, right, the attack time's up here. Here it says it's going to be 20 seconds before this note comes in. So I've pressed the note and it's slowly coming in. It's slowly coming in. It's getting louder and louder. Right? Well, if I have a bunch of really fast notes going, you can sort of see some green down here. But if they're really fast notes, and so if I'm playing this clip, which is populated by a bunch of fast notes, oh, while I'm here, this bottom pane has two sides. Just like the top view has two sides, this is the clip view, this is the instrument view, or the device view. Right? It's where your instruments and all your audio effects are. So if you can't find your MIDI and all you see is a bunch of boxes here, you're on the wrong side. You hit Shift Tab to switch between that, or you can click down here to go between them. But Shift Tab is faster. Tab, just without the shift, will take you from session view to arrangement view, session view, arrangement view, right? but Shift Tab will switch the bottom pane, right? So that's another thing that can go wrong. But yeah, so if you have a really long attack, just because maybe it's like a pad and that's how they programmed it because they wanted it to swell in within like 2 seconds or something and get bigger and bigger, and you're throwing fast MIDI at it and you're like, why doesn't this work? Well, it's not going to work with fast MIDI. Like guitar pluck kind of things or you know, a piano or whatever definitely would, but not everything will. So hold down a note for a while to make sure that, right, it's not just a long attack. So we also talked about how the media files might be missing. That's only going to happen on a device that is utilizing samples. But even up here, a lot of these presets will have multiple layers in an instrument rack. And what that is, if you can have like groups of instruments, and you could have like an operator here, and you could have a sampler, which is either this simpler or a sampler. Both of them are of the class of devices called samplers. They're designed to play samples, right? But notice, I brought this in and it's saying, oh, media files missing, samples offline, media files missing, right? Well, it's looking for something that's in a sound design project. I don't know why, don't worry about it. But if you're looking for something and it's not working, or if it's looking for something and doesn't know where it is, it will pop up this error message here and it's not going to play any sound, right? This operator chain will, but the sampler chain won't. So that's another problem that can go wrong with the instruments. Okay, so for the next problem, I brought up exhale because it's a good example for this. So you'll notice down here all these yellow colored keys. Those are the only MIDI notes that this particular patch in exhale will accept, right? And if I change the patch, it'll be a different set of keys, right? And that's the range that this instrument's designed to function on, right? And so this is fine. If I go down some octaves, right, I'm playing some notes down here or something, it's not going to work. And I'm thinking, why isn't this working? Well, the reason it's not working is because I'm trying to play notes down here and there's nothing attached to it, right? That can also be true in an instrument's chain selector, right? So maybe a preset or whatever. If you're sending MIDI notes and you're outside of this range, like if they have this not covering the whole span for some reason, it's never going to reach your device in the first place, right? So you may be playing MIDI notes that are too low or too high for the instrument that you're on. Now, the other way that that can come up is if you're playing notes that are really low or really high on a sample playing device, it might sound really bad. So it'll still work in theory, but it might not give you the results you're looking for. Right, so if you notice this says drop an instrument or a sample here, if we drop a sample there, right, so this is actually expecting a C3 naturally. If you just drag a sample there, it's going to think the note that will play it as the sample initially exists, like how it was recorded, is a C3. However, if I play a really, really low note, right, or if I play a really high note, it's going to sound weird. Now that might be cool to you and you might be like into that sort of sound, but it's not necessarily going to be what you're looking for. And right, let me grab a bass sound really quick. Delete this, grab some bass sound just so you can get a better sense for what I mean. That sounds horrible, right? Because right, it's expecting a note like this or like this. Right, if I play a really low note, that's not going to sound good either. Right, notice how if I turn off warp, how slow this is going? And it's like making super subsonic sub-bass noises you can't even hear. Right, so it's probably supposed to sound like this, but if you're playing too high of a note or too low of a note, it's going to sound terrible. And so if you don't know, if say you're using the computer keyboard, you can change octaves on your computer keyboard's MIDI, right? The one that's toggled by this guy up here. By Z will take you down octaves and X will take you up octaves, right? So you can see right down here at the very bottom status bar what it says that the computer keyboard's notes are playing. You also might be playing really quiet notes that are too quiet to register, right? And C and V will change velocity. So if you hit C a bunch by accident and you don't know you're doing it, all of a sudden you're sending velocities of 1, right? And if this thing's velocity sensitive at all, right, like that would be this thing, you're not really going to be able to hear it. Whereas if I turn up the velocity, it's going to be really loud, right? So you'll have problems with getting your instruments to work right if you're sending velocities that's too quiet or too loud, too low or too high. Okay, so the next problems that come up, they'll happen the most in a drum rack because it's just got so many chains, right? And so each drum cell is a quote-unquote chain. And what a chain is it's a place, it's a signal flow. It's like, you know, like chains are a bunch of links. It goes from one link to the next link to the next link. So it's a signal flow path. And if you have multiple chains, they're running in parallel as opposed to serial, right? Like as opposed to one after the other, they're both running at the same time. Basically, you can see these chains here, right? Now, there's this little yellow button down here. And if you don't know about this little yellow button, it's going to drive you crazy. So first off, notice this. There's no note up here. So that also goes back to that last point I just made about if you're playing notes that are too high or too low. If you're playing notes in a drum rack where there's no drum cell specified, it's not going to work, right? So now look, see how this just popped open? The reason that popped open, now watch it. Oh, it just changed automatically. Just changed automatically. Oh, I hit, you know, this button. Oh, this A1. All of a sudden it disappeared. And I'm wondering, why did that just disappear? It's this little yellow arrow. And what this is it's auto select. It's going to follow where the MIDI notes go, right? And so it's saying, oh, you played a kick. Let's show you the kick chain. Now that's really useful. That's super useful because let's just say you're trying to change the volumes on these things or the release times or whatever, edit these, and you're like, okay, or let's do filter cutoff, right? So I'm like, okay, I want to filter all my different sounds. And so this I want to make brighter, right? This I want to make darker. This I want to make brighter. Right? This I want to make darker. Then that's really easy because I don't have to come back, select this chain, change it, come back, select this chain. However, if you're trying to look at this and maybe some MIDI's playing or something and this is just jumping around constantly, right? It'll drive you crazy, right? Like if it's getting sent into the tracker, it's coming through your keyboard, it's going to automatically toggle around. This view's going to change all the time. And you're like, I don't understand what's going on. Like, why can't I see what I want to see, right? So, when you're trying to make edits to individual chains and you want it to follow, turn this on. Otherwise, keep it off. Okay, so the next problem that can happen at your instrument level, and this is actually the last one that I have, is chain selection issues. Now, chain selecting is kind of a more advanced topic, but that doesn't mean that things can't go wrong in the chain selection and cause it to mess up for you. So what chain selection means is these are different chains, and what's happening is they're both playing, and you'll notice release, that's playing when I let go, because this is being triggered on note off, just in case you're wondering how it did that. But let's just say I have this soloed. So that's one issue that could be going on, is that you soloed a chain and that it's messed up. But you might also be selecting the wrong chain. So the way this works is this tells you what chains should play. And it'll play everything that's underneath this chain. So you'll notice if I do this, because this blue guy is not underneath this blue guy, it's not going to play. Right? But this one does. However, if this gets out of whack for some reason, nothing's going to play. And this might be hidden from you and you're like, man, why? Like, I see the yellow pumping over here, but no sound is coming out of this. It's not missing samples. So what's going on? It could be your chain selector, right? It could also be that the notes you're playing aren't where the key selector is. Like, so this is a string ensemble, and luckily this goes the whole way. But like, let's just say I grabbed, instead of that, I grabbed a violin. Well, in this case, right, you'll notice it's not playing down here. Well, it actually wasn't this chain selector that wasn't working, it was this chain selector, and you can't even see this unless you upgrade to a sampler. But you'll notice this is also a chain selector, or a sample selector in this case. But if I play notes that are down here, it's not going to work. Yeah, so it's going to throw things off if you're trying to play notes that are outside of the range. So whether it's outside of the range inside your sampling device or it's outside of the range here, it's not going to get to, it's not going to trigger a sample. Right. The other thing could be velocity. Not very much uses velocity, but see right now I'm playing really hard notes, but if I was playing really soft notes, it wouldn't trigger at all. So these are the three types of chain selection. Selecting by this blue line, right, that could be out of place. You could be playing velocities that aren't here, or you could be playing keys that aren't covered by this, and then that won't work on that instrument. But barring all that, your instrument should be working, right? And if your instrument's working, again, what we expect is that, we'll just put anything here. The MIDI comes in on this side, and it's interesting, you can't even see the, because we have this rack, you can't even see the MIDI coming in, but MIDI's coming in, and we get this green, we're good. But things can go wrong along the way in the next section, which is all these effects, right? So this is actually not going to take very long, but basically the effect itself could be causing silence or causing a result that you're not intending, right? So if there's any effects there, you might not know what the effect does or something like that, but it can be causing problems. So for instance, if I have a limiter here, but for some reason this limiter gain is all the way down, right, well, this only goes to -24. Let's use like a utility, which goes all the way to infinity as of, right, so if this is down here, I'm like, why am I not getting any sound? Well, check the green. We want to follow green to green to green, and wherever it stops, is the device before that that's causing the problems, right? So one device that will particularly cause problems with creating silence is a gate, right? So gates are designed to create silence, and if this is like right, if this threshold is really down, basically the way this, it's not reducing all the way, right, but it's creating silence, right? Basically saying is if the sound goes above this level, get rid of it entirely. When it's flipped, when it's not flipped, it says if it doesn't reach this level, make it silent, right? So notice I'm trying to play, and the default is -20 or something like that, -40. I think it's -20, right? So it might just be making it quieter, but if this is at negative, if this sound is not reaching this threshold, we're not going to get any volume. Right? So there's a lot of reasons you might want to use a gate. I'm not saying gates are bad. What I'm saying is that they are a prime candidate for getting audio to disappear when you intend it to be playing. Now, the other thing that might be happening is if you have a rack, right, so you've got reverb and you've got like your reverb here or something, and you have multiple chains going on, it might be that one of these chains is soloed or down, right? And now you're like, wait, why isn't this making sound? Why isn't this making sound? Well, it's because this one's making sound. This one would make sound if it was up. Then you're still only going to get what's coming from this chain because it's soloed. So you can tell if something somewhere in your chains here or your chains in the device rack or whatever are soloed if this is half blue. So if this is half blue, oops, right, then it means something inside of the track is soloed, but the track itself is not soloed. So that could be a problem. Oh, I forgot these yellow buttons, right? These yellow buttons could be off. If these yellow buttons are off at the track level, at the instrument level, at the chain level, any of these are going to prevent sound getting through to them, right? Right, so notice these are off, and I'm like, why isn't this working? Well, because your rack is on, so it's entering the rack, but then the rack isn't producing anything because the devices in the rack are off. If you want to turn this off, you can turn off the whole rack and it'll just flow right by it, right? But if you don't have that or if this is on and these are off, then you're not going to get any sound, right? However, if you just turn a device off, that's not going to be a problem. It'll flow past that. So a device being off isn't going to cause things to create silence, right? It won't work, right? Say if you're like, why isn't my reverb working? It might be that your reverb is not turned on, right? So check the power buttons and make sure that the power buttons are how you want them. But that could definitely be a problem there. So that's it for the effects chain, but I want to review our signal flow really quick. So from us, we entered MIDI either through, like drew it into a clip, right? Or we had hardware, and the hardware was going into maybe our MIDI interface or something, but this is the beginning of the signal flow with us, right? The MIDI is coming in through the signal, or sorry, through our audio interface, or our MIDI interface, or if we're playing like an electric violin or something, it's going in through our audio interface. So we need to check all the cables, right? We need to check that the hardware itself's working, right? We need to check that that's all good, but as long as those are good, it should be entering either, for audio, it would enter one of these external ins, right? Like you can see my microphone's plugged in, right? The cable's working, the microphone's working, so it pops up here. Or if it's MIDI, it's going to be coming into here, and you'll see these yellow dots, right? So that was our first step, is getting into the track. Once it's there, it'll hit the clip, right? Or they'll hit the MIDI clip, basically, or it will start recording into an audio clip if we're talking about audio recording. But then there's all those problems that you can have with the clip. The clip or the MIDI keyboard will then send it to the track, which will start at the very left of your device view, right? The first thing it enters is the instrument. So we talked about the problems that could occur with the instrument, but if your instrument is working, then you'll be getting these green bands, and then it'll go through your effects chain from left to right. If it hits a rack, it's going to split in half, and it's going to go through both of these simultaneously, right? Unless you've got like this chain selector, in which case it'll only go through the chains that are below this chain selector, right? And so you can have chain selection issues at your instrument rack level or at your audio effect rack level, right? But you can have problems each step of the way. And what we want to do is, right, we're going to follow the green, right? That's our trick, is follow the green. So if we've got a reverb, right, we've got like a saturator, whatever, right, a delay, we're like, oh, why aren't we getting sound? Why aren't we getting sound? So you follow the green. It's like, okay, I've got the yellow dots coming in here. It's coming out of my instrument. That's green, so that's working. This is working. This is working. This is working. If you get to the end of your device chain, then it's going to go into your track mixer. So this is the next step. The track mixer amounts to these guys, which are your sends, right? So you'll notice it's getting sent over here now because I have that cranked up. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. It's also this on-off button. So the reason it wasn't working is because I had this off, right? It's also this volume fader, so maybe your volume was cranked all the way down, right? Maybe you're just listening out of your left headphone and you're playing on your right or something like that. This is the pan. This is moving the sound from the right to the left. All right. But once it gets out of here, down here, it's going here. And then it hits this fader and these pans and this, right? So if any of one of these things are causing it to break, it's not going to work. The other thing that's involved is these solo buttons. So you might be soloing something. You might not even be able to see what you're soloing, right? Like say you're like way over here or something, right? And you can't even see, like you're trying to get this to work and you're like, wait, I'm recording into this, right? But you're, you know, soloed over here. And you're like, why isn't this working? Well, if these buttons are grayed out, it means you're soloing something. Right? The easiest way to fix that is just click any solo button twice, and it will soloing something once will say solo this track as opposed to the other ones. Clicking it again will unsolo it, and so nothing should be soloed, and it'll work. You'll notice all these lights turned yellow again. So make sure these yellow lights are on if you want it to play. Make sure you're not soloing it. Make sure your volume's not all the way down. And as long as you're getting green outside of your effects chain, you should be good through this stage, right? Now, let's move on. Right, because you still might not be able to hear anything. And the reason is because you don't hear what comes out of your tracks. You hear what comes out of your master track at the very right. So what you're actually hearing is the green lines that are here. So if I record, we're golden there. But if I pull down my master track, we're not going to hear anything. Right, so this is getting sent out somewhere, and you can see where this goes is right at the bottom here, and it's going to master. Now really quick, if it's not going to master, say you've grouped this, notice it's going to the group right now. So if my group is turned off, this is green, but it's going to the group and the group is turned off. So all the problems you're going to have at the group level are the same that you might have at the track level, basically. So if you have a gate messing up your shit on your group track, and even if this is on, right, but your threshold is so high and this is down, you're like, why aren't I making sound? Oh, your gate's breaking it, right? So we keep tracing from the beginning of our signal chain, keep going through, right? We've determined that our track is working fine because this is pumping green. Look where your track's going to. Is it going to the group? Check your group. Is it going to the master? Check your master. It might be going to sends only. If it's going to sends only, this will turn blue and you might not hear anything. And the reason is because it's only going to go to the sends. The sends are controlled by these knobs, and where it is sent is to these return tracks over here. Now, you might not even be able to see the return tracks, right? So if you're on sends only and this send isn't here, you might not even notice that you have return tracks. You can control R to show and hide return tracks, or you can do it from the view options up here, right? But if you're on sends only, you're only going to go to sends, right? And if you don't want your track to go anywhere, you can turn it to sends only and not send it to any of the sends, right? But as long as you're sending it there, then audio is showing up here. Now, what if this send was also on sends only? It's not going to get to master, right? So, and that could also be true for this group. If your group's on sends only, but you are sending to your group and you're like, this is good, what's going on? Well, it's sending to sends only. And it's, even if it is sending to this send, the send isn't sending to master. So eventually it has to get to the master for you to hear it. Right? It has to get to the master through one route or another, right? And it doesn't have to go through your group, right? You could go directly from the master and never actually hit your group, so notice it's not going to the group, it's just going directly to master. So just be cognizant of where is the audio actually routed to, and make sure that there is an unbroken link all the way to the master, right? Now, if you do get to the master track, make sure your master volume's not all the way down. And in general, you shouldn't change your master volume from 0. Right? That's like it's like a mixing trick. I'll talk about that in videos where I talk about mixing, but generally you don't want to change your master volume. If you want to change how loud the whole thing is, change the volume on your actual speakers or your audio interface, right? So if I want to make this quieter, right, so say I am going to the group, which is then going to the master, you'll be able to hear it, but I'm like, that's too loud. I can just turn down the speaker volume, right, and you're hearing my speakers going through my microphone, right? You're not hearing the system audio directly, right? So I can just change my speaker volume to change the master level that's getting to my ears, right? So as long as everything's not breaking at the device chains or whatever, it's still moving along, it's eventually getting to master. If your master is pumping green, in this case the master's pumping red because it went over 0, right? You don't want your master to go above 0. So I recommend sticking a limiter on your master, Even by default, it's nice to have a limiter on your master to prevent it from getting too loud. But as long as your master is pumping green, right, you should be golden. And keep in mind, this is after all of this stuff. So if I lower this down -24, that's going to happen here, right? If I mute this with a utility, my master's not going to be pumping green. But when I'm looking at my master track, we can see it's entering here. Follow the green, follow the green. Oh, the green stopped here. That's where the problem is, right? So as long as we are getting green out of the master, you should be able to hear it. If you can't hear it, the next step that it went is it went out from your computer through your audio interface. Now, if you don't have an external audio interface, your audio interface might be built into your computer, right? The same one that works like on all your laptops and stuff. Your laptop has sound capability, right? So even if you don't have an external audio interface, you actually have an audio interface inside your computer, and that could be out of whack, right? So the main place to see if your audio interface is out of whack is in your preferences, which again is option, preferences, but it's easier to hit control comma. So control comma, and you need to go to audio. Here is your audio device, which is the same thing as saying your audio interface. This is the type. Audio is the good stuff, right? I'm not going to change this because it'll probably ruin the recording if I swap this out. But the default that Windows works with is this MME DirectX thing. Even if you have an inbuilt audio card, you actually want to use Audio, and you'll want to use this Audio for All. Now, if you haven't installed Audio for All, you want to install Audio for All. It's free. If you just search for Audio for All on the web, it's super quick to install. You gotta like reboot your PC, and then this will show up in your list. And this is what you want to use. It will make everything work way better. Like you'll get less audio crackling, and like you'll be able to have more devices and stuff going on in your project before you start getting problems from being over like loaded in terms of processing and such. It's more efficient. So definitely use Audio for All if you don't have an audio interface. If you do have an audio interface, use your audio interface drivers. If you haven't installed your audio interface drivers, that's probably your problem. So this Complete Audio 6, I had to go to Native Instruments, who makes the Complete Audio 6. I had to go to their website to download the drivers, and I had to install them for this to show up. But that will work best, right? If you have an external audio interface, use the drivers that come with that audio interface, and it'll make your life way, way easier. So make sure that that's actually going on. If you're on no device, you're not going to get any sound. Again, I'm not going to click that because it'll ruin the recording, but make sure that you're on ideally Audio, right, and that you're selecting the correct drivers. And so you want Audio for All if you don't have an audio interface, and if you do have an audio interface, you want the drivers from your interface. And this just says Complete Audio 6, which is the name of my actual interface. So it might not use the word driver in this list. It'll probably just say the name of your device. Now, assuming that your audio interface is actually working, right, it still might not be producing sound. And the main reason that it wouldn't be producing sound is maybe the volume's all the way down, right? So check it. I'm playing notes. It's reaching my master, right? And it should be playing. I'm like, why is it making sound? It's because my volume's all the way down. This happens all the time, right? It happens to me, right? It happens especially to beginners, and they don't realize how easy of a solution it is. But because there's so many points of failure, they don't even think to check the actual hardware. They assume it must be something happening in Ableton. It might be your hardware. It might be that your audio's all the way down on your interface. Or if you're in Windows and you've got like, one of these, volume slider kind of things up here, that might be all the way down, or you might be muted, right? So something might be off there. So make sure your volume's actually up. The other thing is there's a lot of ports in audio interfaces typically. So if you're plugged into the wrong one, you might be like plugged into an input port instead of your headphone jack, or your speakers might be on an input port instead of the main outs of your interface. And so if you're not actually on something that's spitting out sound because you're on something that's trying to listen for sound, you're not going to hear anything, right? So make sure that you're actually plugged into the right port and that the volume is up. Make sure that your cables aren't loose or that they actually fit. So one of my friends had a cable that actually just didn't fit in to the port. Like, it was the right size and everything, but it just didn't lock in there right, and so it had like a really jittery connection. The cable wasn't broken, it's just like something about the way they machined it or whatever, it just didn't set in there right. And so make sure that it's, the cable's set right, that the cable's not actually broken, and again, that it's plugged into the right port and that it's turned on. So the final audio interface problem that happens is sometimes you'll get this really annoying crackling, right? And it's like it's playing what it's supposed to play, but it's just crackling and crackling. You don't know why it's crackling. Well, the reason it does that is because it's having tiny little micro errors at what's called the sample level. And basically your interface is trying to synthesize all this sound and combine it and do all this stuff super, super fast. And so the way it does it without having an error is it creates a buffer for itself. And so it's like looking ahead, a half second or whatever, or like, a tenth or a hundredth of a second even. It might not be very long, but it's looking ahead and it's doing the calculations in advance. And if it falls behind, like say it's looking ahead a tenth of a second and it falls behind, 5/100ths of a second, it'll work to catch back up and get back to that tenth of a second buffer. There'll be no problems. However, if it messes up enough that it doesn't have a buffer anymore, right, it'll cause little crackles, right, because it will only spit out the sound as it is capable. And you can think about that like, when you're trying to watch a YouTube video or something and your internet is in and out, and so sometimes your video stops and then it sits there and it's like waiting to buffer. But even if your internet conks out, it can still play for like a few seconds because it's buffered all of the stuff that it's going to play for you. So it knows what's going to play for you and it can keep playing it even though it's not receiving new material. But eventually it's going to mess up and it's going to stop. That's what these crackles are, right? The way to fix that is you need to go to in your audio device, you need to correct this buffer size here. Now, if you're doing these MME drivers, you'll actually have sliders that are right there. But if you're looking at Audio for All, or you're looking at your driver, you're gonna need to click this hardware setup button. And in Audio for All, there's like this little black page that comes up and there's a slider to drag. And you want to increase the number of samples. And that's going to cause it to crackle less. Now, there's a trade-off to that. So if you're trying to record, the problem is if it's looking ahead more, it needs to create what's called latency, right? Which means before you do something to the time that it actually catches on, right? So if you play a note, the time that it actually plays that note is going to increase. So you can see this overall output latency is 30 milliseconds. What that means is in 3/100th of a second, the difference between when I hit a key, oh, I probably need to close this for this even to work. Right, so my volume's all the way down. But the difference in time between when I hit a key and when it actually plays is going to be 30 milliseconds. 30 milliseconds is about as high as you can have it before it's going to screw up you trying to play in something natural. Like if you're playing a keyboard or whatever, it's going to happen too late. It's going to throw you off. And so you might need this to be lower, like 256 or 512. And this number, it dropped from 30 to 19. So the system will become more responsive, but it's more likely that it's going to run out of buffer and it's going to get that crackling issue. So if you've recorded everything and you are just editing stuff and you're not trying to do time-sensitive recording, then you can leave this at a high number without real problems. But yeah, if your audio's crackling, it'll sound really bad, and it's because this is too low. And let me see if I can replicate that right now. Right, so that sounds horrible, obviously. If I put this back up to 256 even, right, it's fine. And that's just because 32 samples, there's 44,000 of those happening a second. So this is like a fraction of a second, right? Maybe at 96 it'll be a little bit... See, 96 is enough, but if I had a bigger project, 96 wouldn't work. I'd need to go up to like 512 or 1024 or whatever. So assuming that your audio interface is fine, it could be your speakers aren't on, right? So after it gets your audio interface, it goes out of your audio interface through your headphones or through the speaker cable to your speakers, right? It could be at the speaker level, so make sure that your speakers are on and that they're turned up and everything like that. But otherwise, you should be good. I mean, that's the entire signal chain. So if you check every part of the signal chain, you'll be fine. There is one more thing which I want to cover, which is exporting. And if you're trying to create MP3s and such, and so instead of trying to output sound, you're trying to output a file, what could go wrong? There's a couple things that could go wrong. So the first thing is, export's not going to export what's on this page. Exports what's on the arrangement view page. So if you want this drum pattern to play, you want to put it on this arrangement view. And now when I go to export, file, export, right? Notice this render start. It says 25 and it's playing for 1 bar because that's how long this is. Right, so it will export just this little chunk, right? Now, watch what happens when I play this. Right, so what it's actually doing is it's actually playing this track. I might think that it's playing this, but it's not. Look, there's nothing playing. Right, well, the reason there's nothing playing is this isn't actually in my drum rack. I dragged this MIDI clip to the wrong thing. So you might have made actual errors there, right? Now check it. It's still not going to play. Why isn't this playing? You know, I dragged this MIDI clip to where I wanted it on the right track and it's still not playing. That's because you told it to play what's on this side. It's going to continue to play whatever is on this side for every track that you hit a play button on. So in this case, just this one, but every one of these tracks that has a play button like this playing on this side, it's not going to play what it should be playing on this side until you hit this orange button up here. If you look at the lower left-hand corner, this says back to arrangement, right? And what it means is instead of worrying about what's playing on this side, it's going to stop everything that's on this side, right? So it's not playing here anymore. That play disappeared. And this went from a dull yellow, so let me show you again. Right, so if I'm playing this, right, this is all grayed out. When I hit this, it goes nice and solid again. And so now it's playing. And it's not going to continue playing because there's nothing there, right? And if we want it to keep playing, we're going to have to drag it back there. Got it? So make sure that you hit this orange button if you arrange stuff over here that you're trying to export to an MP3 or a WAV file or whatever. Make sure that you hit this, right? The other thing that could be going wrong is if you do any sort of automations, right? Like say you make these automation changes, right? And this is the filter frequency, right? So listen to this really quick, but this filter frequency, right, it's just on this clap, so it's pretty subtle, right? But it's moving this, and it's going to make the clap brighter as it goes through. I'll just draw a bunch of claps so it's easier for you to hear. But listen to this clap as it's going over this amount of time. Cool, that sounds really cool, and you might want to do that as a transitional effect or something like that. However, if you go ahead and change this manually, right, notice that all these lines are grayed out, and now it's not automating anymore, it's just staying at whatever I told it to be at. Right? So if you export something, you're like, man, why isn't it doing all these cool automations I programmed? Well, you've got to re-enable the automations, and that's this button up here. You read at the lower left-hand corner where the help is, it says re-enable automation. When I click that, bam, the automations are working again. Cool? Right, so you might have messed things up because your automation is turned off temporarily. So you got to click that button. So there's two more problems that I have that could go wrong. The first is that, say you're doing this, but maybe you have this track soloed for whatever reason, doesn't matter why. But there's only sound coming this one, and even if there was sound here, all you'd get when you export is the soloed track. And in this case, the soloed track has nothing. So when I export, I'm just gonna end up with silence. And we're like, well, why is it all silent? It's because you told it to only play sounds coming out of this track, and there's no sounds coming out of that track, and now it's rendering a bunch of nothing, right? So you need to make sure your solo's off for it to play everything that you've written here, as well as going back to arrangement, right? And the other reason is when you're exporting, you know, say we've got stuff all over, right? So we've got like stuff over here, and we've got stuff over here, and maybe I'm just clicking around and I'm not even thinking, and I'm just like, I had clicked on that and I'm like looking around and I'm like, okay, it's time to export, right? So I'm going to go to File, Export. You can also hit Control-Shift-R. Be careful like not to hit Control-S by accident or Control-Shift-R by accident sometimes. But you'll notice this says render start 22 bars, or at bar 22. Starting at bar 22, render 1 bar. So it's really just picking up what I selected. Now, if there's other tracks playing at the same time, it'll render all of that's playing. It's not just going to render just this clip. It'll render this whole vertical piece of time, but it's not going to render the whole song. Now, I can fix that by telling this to start at 1, and you know, this song ends at bar 29, so I need to make sure it's 28 bars long to get to the 29th bar. That's one way to do it. The other way to do it is if you don't select anything and you just have clicked in between the lines. Now when you go to render, it's going to say to start, and keep in mind, our first thing is at 6. So it's going to say, oh, let's render everything that they've written here. Well, their first sound starts at bar 6, so we'll put 6 in there for them. Right, so if you want silence at the beginning, you're going to need to tell it to start at 1. Right, and then render for 23 bars long. Well, what is 6 plus 23? It's 29. That's what got us to bar 29. So this is the length. It's basically rendering this block here. Now, if I select this block and I render, you will notice bar 6 to bar 23 because it's rendering my selection. Right? So that's I think that's the very last thing that I had written down of things that could go wrong. So if I come up with more, I'll make an addendum video to this, and I'll put a link to that video in the description. I probably won't like add on to this video because I would need to like re-render it, and I'd need to save all the files and redo the editing and those sorts of things. So I'll probably just put a link in the description and be like, hey, update, these are also things that could go wrong. But yeah, this is everything. So I know this was long, way to stick it out and get to the end. We've been going for almost 2 hours, right? I'm going to edit this down some probably, maybe. But you know, if you're a beginner and you got through this whole thing, right, that's important because it's going to tell you all these different things that could have gone wrong. Right, and it's got to be one of these. And so there will be a list in the description with time markers to help you get through this more easily, and reminders on what could go wrong. But yeah, good job getting through this video. I hope it was helpful for you guys. I know that it's really frustrating that you can't do the simplest things because there's so many points of failure in the signal chain. There's a lot of links in the signal chain. There's a lot of little interface things that can go wrong. This is as many as I could think about, as many as I could find. I think I covered everything that's come up with my students who've had all these random issues that I didn't even remember. Right? I thought there was like a handful of them and that I would cover them as we went along. When I really got down to it, I'm like, whoa, there's like 100 different things that could go wrong. And I'm like, there's no way that they're going to be able to remember them. So I'm like, okay, I'll just make a video on it. Right? And as you've seen, it was like almost 2 hours long. So good work, everybody, on getting through this. Again, my name is Missing Lynx. I'm so happy to help you guys. You know, I love teaching. I love teaching music. I love contributing to the production of music in this world, both, you know, by personally creating it and by empowering you guys to create it. So if I can make the process of, you know, living your dreams and like producing music or learning Ableton and getting over this initial hump when like all this becomes second nature, that's totally worth it. So I'm glad you guys stuck through till the end. Yeah, leave comments if you have other issues that come up and that you want to know how to solve that's not helped by this video or anything else. Please subscribe to my channel. I'm going to keep videos coming. I've got so much to teach you guys. I've got a lot of really powerful, helpful tools to give away to you guys. So yeah, like my channel or like my videos, subscribe to my channel, stay tuned, and thanks so much. Missing Lynx out.